Dramatic video shows what it was like inside last week's U.S. Kurdish mission to free hostages from an ISIS prison. The helmet cam video shows the mission from a soldier's point of view. The raid was successful in releasing dozens of prisoners, but it cost Army Master Sergeant Joshua Wheeler his life. He was killed during a firefight. On 60 Minutes Overtime, CBS News senior national security correspondent David Martin gets a rare look inside the command center where the U.S. is fighting ISIS.
For me personally, we've all seen videos like this before of bombs hitting their targets. What was different about this was it wasn't after the fact. This was real time. You're looking at this cluster of buildings, and there's a road about a quarter of a mile north of the buildings, and there are vehicles going down the road. There go a couple more vehicles, and everybody's just sort of waiting with bated breath for the bombs to hit. I can't from here see any human activity around there. There's nothing unusual going on there. And then all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose.
That'll also decrease the...
Tons and tons of bombs come cascading down.
I think of...
And of course, you're always caught by surprise when it happens. We were told afterwards that sometimes you hear cheers, but we didn't hear cheers, but for all I know, they had been told.
Not with the cameras rolling.
Not with the cameras rolling, yeah. And then what you saw,
Look at the amount of secondaries that are going off there.
Were these large secondary explosions, explosives that were being stored inside this building. And these explosives were used to make car bombs.
So that confirmed that the target was a car bomb factory.
A legitimate target.
Did you ever learn whether anyone was killed in the mission that you watched?
Well, I know of no allegations that any civilians were killed. If an ISIS fighter is in there working on a car bomb, he's a legitimate target. I think that the concern they have is nearby buildings. In this case, the closest building was about 150 feet away. So they dropped their smallest bomb, a 500-pound bomb, on the target that was closest to that building.
To minimize?
To minimize the blast effect. This command center cost $60 million to build. The Air Force will tell you over and over again, this is the most precise bombing campaign in history, and it is. But when you're dropping tons of explosives, bad things can happen.
They must have been afraid that bad thing might happen on the day 60 Minutes was there.
Well, that's why they keep these targets under surveillance for so long.
Nice and slow.
Why do you think the Pentagon let you see this?
Well, one, maybe to get me off their back. I've been nagging ceaselessly about this.
Off you go.
But two, they think their story is not being told. They always say how much they try to avoid civilian casualties, but you just sort of have to take them at their word. If you let people see how much study you put into a target before you hit it, then that makes the case.
Okay, let's just begin by going around and everybody saying their name.
You interviewed an air crew.
I'm Captain Matt. I'm a pilot.
Are you just going by your first names?
Yeah, that's what we're...
Yeah, that's what we agreed to.
Okay, didn't know that. Okay.
I know your team also put some GoPro cameras in the B-1 bomber that flew that mission. Did you get a sense of how much they know about a target before they drop those bombs?
Oh, yeah. They study this.
So in this case, it was a single-story building on that one, and we wanted the weapon to explode just above, essentially, the height of us. So we put a delay on the weapon. The weapon penetrated the flat roof of the building, detonated, and well, you saw the result.
Yeah. So we're talking milliseconds here.
Absolutely, yeah. Of course, that depends upon the construction of the building, the density of the concrete.
You know all that? You know the density of the concrete?
Like I said, sir, we put a lot of time into these.
David Martin is at the Pentagon. David, just an amazing story. You were able to get very rare, in-depth access at the U.S. military mission overseas. How effective is the coalition's fight against ISIS, despite the loss of Sergeant Wheeler in that prison raid last week, as well as the Pentagon's failed training program in Syria?
Well, there are lots of ways to measure whether the air campaign is having a success, and you can get statistics that show how many thousands of pieces of equipment that the airstrikes have destroyed. You can get unofficial estimates on how many fighters have been killed. But I think the one measure that counts is land retaken from ISIS. Remember, this all started when ISIS swept out of Syria and across Iraq, almost to the outskirts of Baghdad, and now it has begun for the last 14 months the long, slow, painful process of taking all that territory back. And so far, it's been a very slow grind. If you look at the amount of territory that's changed hands, what you see is that the Iraqi army and some of the Syrian rebel fighters have taken back land, but you also see that ISIS has seized additional territory. If you add it all up, ISIS is probably a net loser of territory from this time back in 2014. But it is a very slow grind, and the thing that is controlling the pace of operations really is the ability of the Iraqi army to mount offensives against some of these cities that ISIS took back in 2014. And U.S. officials are becoming increasingly open about their frustration with the Iraqis' failure to take advantage of all these airstrikes that are being flown on their behalf.
You know, up until the prison raid, the U.S., what we'd heard about were the airstrikes, really, fighting ISIS from the air. So how involved really is the United States when it comes to on the ground in Iraq and Syria?
Well, we know they have 3,500 troops. The U.S. has 3,500 troops in Iraq. Most of those are trainers, advisors to the Iraqi armed forces. But there are some there who are members of the Delta Force, the U.S. Army's premier counterterrorism force, and that's the unit we saw in action in that raid. And there was an earlier raid a couple of months ago trying to capture a senior ISIS official inside Syria. The official was killed in the raid, but his wife was captured, along with a lot of cell phones and laptops. And I think on Friday, Secretary Carter predicted there would be more raids like this, and I think the reason is just destroying targets from the air. I mean, that's great. So you've eliminated one potential threat. But you're not gaining any intelligence. In fact, if there's any intelligence at that site, you've destroyed it. The way you gain intelligence is by conducting these raids. You kill or capture whoever is there, and then you scoff up all the laptops and cell phones. That's how the U.S. military took down al-Qaeda in Iraq during the last war in Iraq. And I think Secretary Carter was predicting that there's going to have to be more of that, so you can get a better understanding of how ISIS operates and who its operatives are before you can expect to take them down in this war.
You know, David, you mentioned the last war, the term whack-a-mole came up a lot.
Yeah.
Is there a concern, or how much of a concern is there, that even as you might be able to tamp down ISIS militant activity in one area, that certainly that leaves other areas vulnerable to ISIS? Well,
it's the classic case, and we've been in these wars before, where you can't kill your way out of these wars. These are counterinsurgency fights, and the enemy is hiding among the people. You can't conduct the kind of bombing campaign that would really destroy the enemy, because if you were to do that, you would have a toll of civilian casualties that nobody wants. And so you are reduced many times to doing these strikes of onesies and twosies. When we when we were there watching that particular strike on those buildings, after that B-1 bomber conducted the strike on those buildings, it still had bombs left because it carries 22 bombs in all when it takes off. And so it still had bombs left to drop, and it refueled and then went into a holding pattern until it was given another target. And the target it was given was to go check out a report of one man on a rooftop with a rifle. So here you have this bomber that was built in the 1980s to drop nuclear weapons on the Soviet Union, out there given a mission to go hunt for one sniper. And in the event, the sniper had disappeared, but the B-1 actually found some tunnel entrances and dropped bombs on the tunnel entrances. But you know, these are low-value targets, but that's mostly all that ISIS has. You saw that attack on the building. Okay, that building is destroyed. Those explosives are destroyed. But what's to stop ISIS from moving into another vacant building and cooking up another batch of homemade explosives?
All right, perspective there from David Martin, our senior national security correspondent with extraordinary access, a look at the U.S. military mission against ISIS. David, thank you so much.
Sure thing.